Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Catching-101 TV. Just like always, super excited for today's guest. If you're familiar with my channel or me as social media at all, you'll probably recognize him. He's been a speaker at CatcherCON a number of times. He's prevalent on social media, hosts camps all over the country, but probably more importantly, he's the catching coordinator for the Los Angeles Dodgers. So I'd like to welcome Ryan Sienko.
How you doing, buddy?
Good, man. How are you?
Doing good. Just surviving out here.
I hear you. Well, everything's tough right now with no baseball being played, but at least we've got baseball on the horizon, it looks like.
That's the rumor, at least, right, for today.
for now, we'll see. Well, Ryan, like I said before, I mean, I would imagine most of the people watching this are probably familiar with you, like I said, from being on social media and being with the Dodgers and speaking to CatcherCON. But for maybe somebody who's tuning in for the first time, if you wouldn't mind just kind of going through your background, I think that's always a good way to start, just so people know, kind of what you've done in baseball and how you got to be where you are.
Sure. Grew up in Elgin, Illinois, outside Chicago. Played on some really good teams there as a youth and kind of fueled my passion for the game. And went on to the University of Iowa, and then was with the Rangers, White Sox, some independent teams. Played 8 years in the minor leagues. And that was kind of the end of that for me. Right after I got done, I actually joined Tom House when he just first started the National Pitching Association. I had caught for him in the off seasons for like a year and a half or something when I moved out to San Diego. And then, kind of learned and saw the passion that he has, obviously, and the technology and how he used it. And that really interested me, and traveled and did some stuff. I was a director of operations or whatever for the company for like 5-6 years. Did camps and stuff with Tom for a number of years. Forever grateful. He's an incredible guy, and learned a lot of stuff with him. And as I got the job with the Dodgers, stepped right into using the tech. There's a decent budget there, and they allow us to get a lot of things. And actually, you can see it over my shoulder here. It's our sleeve, or catching sleeve, that we got really early on, which had 4 or 5 sensors on it. We had an app for it, or Avid app for it, and it gives you both voice prompts so the guys can learn some stuff, and then we have the app that you can filter on and off if we're using certain or looking for certain things. So along those lines, I've always had an interest in how tech and it can help you, and we've used that quite a bit, and I think everybody knows how we're able to get numbers and the analytics and use those to our advantage now, as we're working through the seasons with the guys and in their development. So I like to think of it as a way for us to just enhance what they're working on rather than judge them on a certain level.
That's awesome. And I definitely want to go back and hit on a number of things you just spoke about there. But just for anybody who's listening or watching, in the off season, you do still put on camps, correct?
Sure. I think it's the best way for me to learn, to be honest with you. For the first, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years that I was doing this, I would go home on my off days, and I would do, if I was home for 2 days, I'd do 1 full day of lessons. That just became a little bit too much for me with the travel and the responsibilities that I have. So I haven't done that for a little bit, but that was the way that I got to learn and try new things to take to my guys, right? What I found is that the challenges for 8 and 9-year-olds are virtually the same challenges for 24-year-olds or 26-year-olds. Maybe they're a little bit more nuanced or whatever, but they still have the same issues. There's mobility, flexibility issues, there's strength issues, there's timing issues, there's visual issues, right? So figuring out what we were going to use and how we were going to use certain steps to help the guys really helped me with the younger players more than anything, and vice versa, because I would see things with, say a high school kid, a sophomore in high school, and that might be a fix, an instant fix, or an instant feel that this young man had given me. that I couldn't relate to personally that I was able to pass on to somebody else. So, I think that doing camps and clinics and lessons for any instructor, especially in professional ranks, is huge, because we get really lost into the 30 guys that we have, or the 27 guys, or whatever's in the organization. So, I think it's a huge deal.
Well, I definitely agree with you, and I'll be honest. I was trying to throw you a softball there. I was wanting you to go ahead and plug your social media and your camps and your website and stuff. So go ahead and do that, so everybody knows where to find you.
That catch and throw, catch_and_throw. When I made that, I didn't realize that that's kind of a pain in the butt to do, but that was a long time ago. So
too late now.
Just catch and throw. I'll probably do, if this whole thing lets up, I'll probably do still a couple camps in the off season. Try to do one here in Phoenix and one in somewhere else, one or two. But I love it. I'll tell you what, I get as much enjoyment out of that as I do when our guys have success. So that's, for me, seeing a young kid, and I'm sure you're the same way, like that aha moment, that really kind of fuels what it is that I like, as a coach. That's what I dig.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm exactly there with you. And, like I said, you kind of talked about a couple of things that I want to circle back around to. You talked about the sleeve, and just to give everybody a little background about that. A couple of years ago, I went out to spring training, and you were nice enough to invite me. And I got to watch you guys kind of from a distance. I wasn't right in there with you, but I got to see the sleeve in action, and saw it firsthand, and a really cool tool that you guys have developed and used. And I definitely want to get into the mechanical aspects and kind of the X and O's, type stuff. But I also know that one of the major things you guys have going on in your organization is just the culture, the culture among the catchers, and the mindset and the approach and the preparation and everything along with that. So kind of before we get into maybe some of the, the actual receiving talk or blocking or throwing, whatever it is, I'd like for you to kind of just hit on the culture and what you guys teach, and what's kind of the mindset that all the guys in your organization, are kind of trying to have.
All first comes down to serving our pitching staff. That's first and foremost in everything that we do. Our mantra is serve to lead, just that servant leadership mentality. But there's so many things that are encompassed within serve to lead. So we use it in a lot of different ways, right? It's how we go about our game planning. It's how we go about the pitch calling. It's how we go about the language barriers and learning, Spanish for some guys and learning English for others, so they can communicate better with their teammates. About being a great teammate. I think we could probably add another 30 or 40 things underneath that umbrella. The culture is king here. I believe that without a good culture, we're not going to have good players. And the pillars of our player development department are, flexibility, trust, and communication, along with a number of others, but those are the main pillars. And, for us, that communication piece is going to be way up there. The trust obviously is going to be right in the middle. And then the flexibility to kind of roll with the punches on everything, whether it be you not getting swings, or you having to do something early, or you having to go pick up an extra bullpen or live BP, or, sacrifice some of your own personal time to make sure that this pitcher has a good plan going into the game. Those are all the big pieces that we preach. And if you're not going to be able to do that, you're not going to be a catcher in our organization for very long, honestly. And then the chance of you making to the major leagues, you better really, really be able to hit, put it that way.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I'm curious to know, like I said, everything you said, I mean, is excellent. I've heard you speak about it before, and you and I have had conversations about it. Are there ever any issues with either the younger guys, or maybe a guy that you guys acquire who's been in another organization after a couple of years? I guess I'm asking, is there a learning curve, or most guys, do they embrace it, really quickly, or what's just kind of the process getting guys acclimated to that system where, maybe they've come from another organization or a high school, and that's not what they were taught. That they don't have the same culture that you guys have built. you know, because I think it's really important. And like I said, I'm with you. I couldn't agree more that our job is to be there for the pitching staff. It's funny though. I think the other day I put out a poll on Twitter, and it was something along the lines of who's more important, and you know, pitchers or catchers. And you know, most of the people that follow me are into catching, so the response was catching. But I was like, no, that's not it. Like it's the pitchers. But just curious, you know, what the younger guys, how they kind of embrace it, or guys that are new in the organization.
Kind of two parts. One, the way we look at it is that 20%, you know, 15 to 20% of the organization can help the most important 60%. And that's where our true value comes into play. Whether, you know, with the strike zone stuff up in the air, we don't know what it's going to be. That's still going to be part of it, right? How we go about our day, how we go about our relationships, how we go about, you know, planning. So that's the first piece to that. The second piece, there is a learning curve, right? Especially when we get new drafted guys. Drafted guys or signed guys. Because one, they've probably not had to have that kind of like bar set for them. Secondly, the expectation in a high school, in a college environment, maybe isn't there as much because they don't have as many responsibilities, right? They don't have to handle the game planning. They don't have to handle the game calling. They're both just getting numbers and stuff, which I agree and disagree with in many different ways. So yeah, there is a learning curve. Guys coming from other organizations, it's been a piece of cake, honestly. Now, that's going to change. The reason it's been a piece of cake is in many other places, they don't have the culture that we have. And now they're getting thrown into this pot that's spinning fast, and they need to play a little catch up, and they like it because they've always wanted to have more. So whenever we've gotten guys from other organizations, it's been awesome because we're getting what they were taught in one place and mixing it with ours. And, you know, those guys are really, really hungry. I'm sure that's going to change some as now it's become a lot more important to a lot more organizations. So I think it's great. It's only going to push our position further and pushes us as the leadership in those, you know, in that department to be better. So I think it's been great on one end and there are challenges on the other, but once the guys get going, there's an accountability factor that's here with and they take it very seriously. And, you know, if the others aren't doing their job, they're going to be, you know, told about it and they're going to be helped by the other guy. And that's just part of the gig. That's what we expect. We expect them to help each other. We expect them to become better public speakers. We expect them to become more precise with their game plan. And they're going to help each other. And what's really cool is when you see, especially veteran, older players selflessly grab the younger guy and get him in the right direction. That's the best. And conversely, we've had guys where they've lacked some of it and had some trouble with it. We've honestly had, you know, a player, well, actually just one where they pulled him off the field and said you were being a bad teammate. Once you become a good teammate, you get to go play baseball again. So it's essentially like a timeout. And I totally agree with it because that 1 month or 5 weeks or whatever it was in his development on the field was never going to be reached if he didn't do the other. So I think, you know, those things, those pieces of accountability and those pieces of development go hand in hand, but you have to be authentic with it. That's where it can get really tricky because in our environment, it's great. We have time. In other environments where you need to win today or where you need somebody to be really good in a week, that's going to be a harder thing to do. And we've talked about this, and I'm sure you've heard me talk about it before. Like we're in a crock pot environment where we get to throw stuff in, add ingredients, check it every so often, smells good, let's add this a little bit. And then in 3 or 4 or 5 years, we have the product that we really want. Not the product, the guy is where he wants to be. Whereas another environment, it's just throwing the popcorn in the microwave and in 2 minutes you need to have it ready. And that's what you're going to get. So I think the educational piece is the hugest most important, capital, bold letters, that's the piece that we have to work on as catching instructors, is the education of our men, because they are not generally born as just a leader that can speak well, that can put a scouting report together really well, that is a great teammate, that is a great player on top of it. All that stuff needs to be cultivated, and it takes a little bit of time that maybe some others actually don't have, right? And that's a shame. But when we get them, that's the first assessment, is like, where are we at in this process? What have you done? What have what's your experience been in game calling? What's your how do you feel about this? How can we help? And then we start to do the assessment to see where we need to start.
Man, interesting comment, and a lot of good info there. One of the things you said, you talked about the other the guys that come from other organizations, it being easier for them. I just want to take a second and kind of, I want to give you credit. I know you probably wouldn't accept all credit for that, but I'll be honest, the first time that I had heard the term serve to lead was from you a couple of years ago. And again, maybe it's within your organization, but as you've become more, let's call it vocal on Twitter, or more visible, whatever you want to call it, I feel like that's a very common term now. And I know it's something that I don't know if it's necessarily copyrighted or not, but it's a Dodgers thing. But a lot of people kind of take that mantra, like, we're going to serve the lead, and I just wanted to kind of give you compliments. I think a lot of that starts with you and what you guys have done in that organization. And not just in professional baseball, but I see a lot of guys use the hashtag serve the lead, fairly regularly on Twitter. So it's kind of just a compliment and a testament to what you guys have been doing and what you're doing. Like I said, I know you probably won't take full credit for it, but it is a testament, to what you guys are doing and where you guys have come. Two other things that you kind of said that I want to go back and hit on a little bit. And again, you used the word authentic. I think that's an awesome word, and for me, it kind of resonates with me. I know as a younger coach, I hate to admit it now, I made some mistakes, and I was probably selfish at times. There was times I was thinking about, we threw a guy out, and I was thinking about, the catcher statistics. They're not my statistics, but they're the ones that the players that I was overseeing, they were their statistics, and I was kind of embracing them as my own. And I didn't necessarily probably have as great of a relationship as I probably should have with some of those guys. And I feel like I've done a better job as I've gotten a little bit older, trying to create a relationship. But I loved how you said, we're talking about educating, but just talking about being authentic. And to me, that means just building a relationship with the guys. If you wouldn't mind just expanding on that a little bit more and kind of going into detail, because I think that's an important thing, that whether you're a dad listening to this, or you're a high school coach or a college coach or even a pro ball guy, to me, it's one of the most important things in coaching.
I think that the relationship is the biggest piece. If you had asked me this, same as you, 5 years ago, I would not have thought of this. 6 years ago, 7 years ago, whatever. If we form really strong relationships with the guys, if they trust us, right? Strong relationships will equal trust. And we've got to earn that through time. If we're able to do that, we're going to get more out of the player. Because as you know, and as anyone that's, probably over 21 knows, right? It's different now, right? It's different now than it used to be. We have bigger relationships, stronger relationships with the players than in times past. That's the athlete that we're dealing with. Like it or not, that's the athlete we're dealing with, and we need to have it. If they don't trust us, they will most likely shut down or not listen, right? I don't need them to do everything I say. I just hope that they listen to what I have to say to them. And that's like the biggest piece, because the more I can call somebody and be really honest about what I want to say, then it's not just fluff. And it's not, okay, I'm just caring about, like you said, the stats or our receiving cards or just the numbers on the back of the baseball card. Because to be quite honest, it doesn't matter, right? None of that matters other than, are they getting better? Because performance is going to be up and down. Years will be great and years will be poor. But if that player is showing constant, growth, then we're okay. And that's all we need. And that's what we need as an organization and an instructor. And for the player, all he needs to show is growth every year. And then that's where he's going to be judged. You know, the numbers will take care of themselves if there are growth, if there is growth. Going back kind of 2 steps, the serve to lead thing. Yeah, that was just, we had a task to make a mantra for our department. Like, the guys are the serve to lead. It has nothing to do with us as instructors. Like, they've taken it and it's become a thing, right? The t-shirts say serve to lead, and that's really where it ends as far as, you know, what we had an influence on. It has to do with the expectation that the players have set for themselves in their group. It's cool to see on the hashtags and stuff, but there's no, like you said, there's no credit to be given on any of it. It's just about like serving the pitching staff, and I'm really big into that. And everybody that's in our catching department, that, you know, the 5, 6, 7 guys that get to work with their catchers, like, it's a big deal for us. So you either are with us or you're not in that respect. And, you know, it's a fast moving train, and there's a lot of competition within our group. And that's what serve to lead is, right? Now, we can joke about it whenever something goes good for us. We always just say serve to lead, mic drop, and walk out of the room, you know, just for fun. But, you know, it is an important piece in our organization with our group. You know, the catching core here is strong. And like I said, there's a high bar for them to be a catcher up on the big club that Doc and Andrew and Brandon Gomes, Jeff Kingston, those guys, Stan Caston, my gosh, in order to play for them and be the dude up there, you better be able to walk the walk in every aspect of it.
Yeah. Well, you know, it says a lot about what you guys doing. The talent you're putting on the field at the big league level. I mean, y'all's catchers are doing as well or better than anybody. So there's definitely a lot to be said, you know, for that over the past number of years, just the numbers they put up. And kind of, I guess to kind of mend a couple of topics together, you know, earlier you talked about when you were with, you know, Tom House and the technology, and then kind of how some of that stuff started getting implemented with the catching stuff and the sleeve. And now there are more, you know, metrics and ways to evaluate catchers than ever before, you know, even within the past just couple of years with Hawkeye, and now there's TrackMan on more amateur fields across the country. But I'd love for you just to kind of touch on, you know, with the tech available, what are some of the things that have changed over the past couple of years, and maybe how has that changed? I know we have numbers available and we have ways to, you know, evaluate catchers, but how is that necessarily being used, or how is that information being given to the catchers so that they can evaluate and actually try to improve because of it?
Well, we don't hide anything from the guys. You know, I made that very clear from the very beginning that I wanted them to see everything that we got to see. Because, you know, if it's a hitting stat, they can go on Fangraphs and look at, you know, what their ISO is. Say they don't have enough power, they can go and look it up ISO or expected slug or any of those things. For us, like especially when it was a little bit new, the metrics are coming out. We didn't have like stats to give them other than just spreadsheets of numbers, right? So once that got created, I wanted to make sure that the guys were, you know, educated on what they were being evaluated on. Now, the hard part with receiving numbers is that you're so codependent on, or you're very dependent on the pitching staff, right? If the pitching staff is throwing a lot of pitches near the strike zone, your available chances to get strikes are better, right? If the guys are having, you know, say the best command pitcher you might have is having a horrible day, you're probably going to get dinged a little bit more. But it's no different than if you went, you know, 0 for 3 today and then 1 for 2 with a walk tomorrow, right? You feel good about one day, you feel bad about the other, but then you move on. I think we've gotten to where we were a few years ago, because we had the statistics early, now kind of in the general, because there's a lot of overreacting to the daily receiving. and this pitch or that pitch, and you should try to steal this pitch and you should try to steal that pitch. I don't think that's the point, and I think it's gone a little bit overboard at this point. The idea is that we just get every pitch called a strike that we can, not necessarily try to steal as many as possible. So it's like the numbers themselves will just tell us, for us, it goes off strike probability, and it takes the pitcher, and it takes the hitter, and it takes the umpire, and it takes the catcher, and it takes, the league and all these other pieces in the outs and the innings and the runners. That all goes into some algorithm that I'm not even close to being like qualified to talk about. But when it gets spit out, we get probabilities of what that pitch should be called a strike. Now, when I get my list every day, all I'm looking at is, are there the trends? Are the trends that they're getting the strikes in certain places? Is that continuing? Or have we leveled off? Or where there's the debits, where they got balls and, called, higher percentage probable strikes being called balls, are we seeing a trend that it's into a certain location? Are we seeing a certain move that's causing that? Maybe it's a late pre-pitch, or if it's just a bad attack angle, or, who knows? Sometimes the answer is like, man, I just messed up. And then we just move on. Because what I'll do is they get the reports. I might maybe even have the video attached for specific pitches and say, hey, tell me what happened here. The guy's recall is incredible, which I'm sure if, it would have been there when you and I played, we would still have that recall from the day before really easily, which you talk about sequences, but then you might go, yeah, I got caught, or I just didn't see that one, or umpire said he missed it. Like, that's fine. All those things are valid reasons. They're not excuses in my book. What all we're trying to do with the technology is actually make it simpler at this point. Where are the trends taking us? Are they taking us in the direction of we're getting better with certain moves, or are we struggling? Now, can we match up with certain pitchers? Is it this specific guy to this very specific location that's giving us trouble? Let's go work on that exact thing. What it's allowed us to do is say, okay, it's four-seam fastballs up and away in the strike zone. He's always late. Well, let's go to that one zone, work on it. Block train that for a little bit. Then we can start to make it random, and then we can go back to some variables across the board, and then see if he can get to a certain spot. Now, it might just be a blind spot, which everybody has, or a spot that you're just not that good at. But at least if we work on it, potential is going to get better. And that's all we're trying to do with any of the work that's attached to the numbers.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And I'll be honest, so I was speaking with some guys last year with an organization, and it seems like to me that with the technology and the new statistics, it seems like because they're new, it's kind of like the new shiny toy. And because we're able to measure it now, it seems like a lot of people put them under a microscope. And I don't want to say it's the only thing, but they're getting overanalyzed, to where it sounds like you guys have a really good approach where you're able to step back and take a broad view and just kind of look at the trends, rather than, we're missing the crossfires, or we're missing this pitch, or we're not getting this pitch, or we are getting this one, very specifically. Because, man, I think you hit the nail on the head. If you beat yourself up over every pitch that you miss, I mean, that's a lot of, you're hitting yourself in the head a lot of times throughout the course of the season. So I like that approach. I think it's a mature approach, not just from you, but from your organization, because it is, it's the new shiny toy. And, of all these conversations that we have, and I know you have with other people, that's what everybody wants to talk about. It's receiving. And a couple of years ago, it wasn't like that. A few years ago, not in the not too distant past, it was throwing. I mean, everybody wanted to be, talk about throwing and the pop times and the this and exchange and that and throwing, and now everybody wants to be a receiving guy, which is awesome, because I think we both understand how important receiving is. But I do think that because we're able to measure it now, I think it's an area that, I hate to say it gets overanalyzed, but it gets looked at with a lot more scrutiny than probably some of the other areas. I don't know if you'd agree with that or not.
Yeah, completely. I think we just, listen, we overreacted to this whole thing many times. Like, don't get me wrong, we just hit the peak a little earlier. That's all it really came down to. So, you know, this is the 6th year of having all these numbers available to us. So it's been around maybe just a little tick longer than most teams. There was other teams that still had some numbers back when we were getting them. But I agree. Like, you can't, I mean, every coach preaches, you know, being able to turn the page and not taking something too hard. Yet, if a shortstop misses a pitch, you know, misses a ball, they just move on. There's a man on first. It's just when things go wrong with us, it's just much more noticeable. And when we screw up a count, you know, that could be the ball game. And, you know, we've talked about this in the past. Like, the thing about receiving is that you just don't know what pitch is important, because every pitch is equally important. Every pitch that's going to come to you is the most important pitch ever thrown in your life. That's a lot of weight to bear. And sometimes you don't see, right? Time of day, venue, the person throwing, there's a lot of things. Maybe, and you blink, and that might be it. That could be literally the answer of why that happened. I'm not saying that we still don't harp on certain things, because I've received late night texts, you know, on a very specific pitch to go look at, whether it be in the major leagues or in the minor leagues, from a manager or from the GM, like, and it's like, what happened? I'm not there. I have no idea. I'll check it out when I get the video, you know, and look at it 17 different ways to come up to say, like, that pitch doesn't do what the other pitches normally do when he throws that. So maybe he just got caught because it did a little bit more. And that literally could be the answer, rather than micromanaging the guy to where he doesn't want to do anything with you because all you're doing is just crapping on him the whole time. I think we have to be super careful in this one piece. The toll that the catchers have from catching every day, especially in the heat, right? That kicks their butt physically. The game planning, all the other stuff kicks their butt mentally. There's this whole thing with swinging a bat, which suffers usually, that if they're not hitting and they're not catching well, there's nothing good in their day, period. And we have to be really careful to be mindful of their, like, mental health in this whole thing as well. Because, like I said, every pitch is the most important pitch they're ever going to catch. So if that's the case, they're not hitting, they're beat up mentally, maybe they took the foul ball and something hurts, you know, their leg, they can't run anything out. And now you're just crapping on them when they're catching, like, that literally could just be the end of the player. The same way that just, you know, an old school coach could be just hard on you. And we're not looking at it as that, you know, we just are piling on to something that we're just trying to help with. So I think, again, that relationship needs to be there to where a player can go like, dude, not now. Not now. We'll talk about it tomorrow. Yeah. Or vice versa, where they're going to come up to you and it's like, you can just see the hamster is burning up the wheel, to where you go like, oh, that's fine. We'll just talk about it tomorrow. It's no big deal. Because it isn't a big deal, right? In the grand scheme of life, if you screwed up that pitch, the worst thing that could happen is that you lose a game, right? The best thing that can happen is that he understands that that was important, takes responsibility for it, but then wants to make sure that it doesn't happen again. If that's the only thing that you get out of it without saying one word, then it's a win. So I think we just have to be a little bit more mindful of, because there is so much more information, especially to people that haven't had it, or that it's new to, that the piling on of the poor catcher doesn't start, because it can be really harmful to them. And I mean, I'm sure you've had it. I certainly had it, to where things would go bad on the field and you're upset about it. And then you come in and it was 3 outs ago. And then, you know, boom, like, now the coach is yelling at you and you have to go up and hit. And you're like, man, I'm beat up right now. I don't know what to do.
Yeah, I know
And
for me
also,
personally, when you say that, I think back to my days in the minor leagues, and I was not a great minor league player. I'll be the first to admit that. And I remember, later in my career, I'm not an everyday starter. I'm catching the day game on Sunday. I'm playing very sporadically, and I put this pressure on myself, like, oh my gosh, if I don't get 2 hits today, I'm not going to play again for another 2 weeks. When in reality, I wasn't playing again for another 2 weeks anyway. But you put all this pressure on yourself. And I can imagine that just gets amplified even the higher you go, when there's more on the line, when you are a big leaguer and you're in the last year of a contract and you've got, you're going to sign, and there's just all these different things going on. I think it's just important that we kind of keep that in mind. You use the term mental health or mental wellness or whatever we want to call it, just their mental well-being, to keep that in mind, because it is, hitting is tough, and just the way catching is right now, it's easy to get critiqued on every pitch. I mean, if you miss a pitch, it's going to be on Twitter the next day. Somebody's going to clip it and put it as a highlight. And if anytime a ball goes to the backstop or you do something stupid, it's just you're under the magnifying glass. So I'm with you. I think that's important. I do kind of want to transition a little bit. We've talked a lot about the importance of receiving and the metrics and that sort of stuff, but I'd love to know a little bit more specifically, whether it be mechanically or technique wise, what are some of the things that maybe y'all teach the guys there? The big term now is, whether it be stealing strikes or, just trying to expand the strike zone. What would be some of the, techniques or things you teach, or maybe verbal cues or thoughts that might go through the guy's mind as you're trying to improve their receiving? What would be some of the things you work on?
the first thing is that we're just trying to first, give them as much time as possible, right? We're under a finite amount of time. The ball gets thrown at a certain miles an hour, it takes X amount of time to get to us. So we're trying to just maximize that time, stretch it as far as we possibly can. First, the more time they have, more likely things are going to go their way. The same way that guys might catch sliders a little better than fastballs or curveballs, actually, because it's going to be the guy that has bigger moves that get him in trouble with a fastball might actually be beneficial for him with a breaking ball. So time is the number one thing. And then the timing within that, right? So you have time and timing, and then just trying to maximize those two things. So whether it be your pre-pitch, getting it done and as close to release as possible for most guys. And then that allows them a little bit more time to get to where the ball is going to end up. I think what we see a lot of times with younger catchers or guys that don't have as much experience, and experience meaning just the number of reps, that they still chase the ball, right? The ball comes out and their first move is to go to where they see the ball. And then that path becomes a little long to where the ball ends up. So, it's transitioning and really getting the information from what the pitch says. So the spin of it, the pitch you called, hopefully it has the right spin of what you called, the speed of it, how fast is it going to get to us? And then the hardest part for us is the location, right? We have to figure out precisely where is this ball going to be when it gets to where I decided it's going to be, and then the small, minute adjustments that we have to do off of that. So that's what we focus the majority of our time on. The second part that we put our time in is going to be the positions and the angles. So we have a big targeting mandate here, right? We, from the top down, we target to where we want the pitch to go. So dropping the glove or having it sweep and some other stuff, that's not going to be probably moves that you're going to see out of the majority of the guys with our club, simply because from the top, they want the target to be very specific for the pitcher. They do a lot of work in our game plan, or we do a lot of work in our game planning. Up in the major leagues, they have a team that does that. So they know where they want the ball to be positioned or thrown, and then you take the misses within that. So we're trying to make our moves as minimal as possible, so the targets, they really matter to us. So working within that framework, we have to find our own timing to make it work. So, you know, with the big club right now, you've got just power. They acquired some power relievers. So you have Gratterall throwing 100-mile-an-hour sinkers. Saw it last week. Kid named Victor Gonzalez, it's left-handed from way over on the side at 96, 97. You've got Urias throwing stuff. You've got, you know, Blake Trinan throwing 100-mile-an-hour sinkers. You've got, you know, Pedro Baez throwing 96 rise balls. So, like, we've got to be able to adjust to each guy and then know the predictability of where those misses might occur and then be able to handle them to then craft the ball, you know, for presentation. So, you know, I think there's different sections of what we're working on. The time and timing is always going to be first, you know, followed by the precision of where we want to be, and then really working on those angles, being able to handle especially from the relievers, shoot the big velocity that they're seeing nowadays, especially if the guys are a little bit erratic. You know, you've got to be able to cover everything. Especially now with how much people are throwing up in the zone. You know, the argument is always that it's effectively there because of swing and miss. But if the pitch is somewhere near the strike zone, we still have to do our best to try to get that a strike. And you know, from the mindset of our group, it's being able to cover that 100 sinker, and then if he's going to go four seam up, like still being able to cover that ball too and keep it somewhere near the strike zone for presentation to the umpire. So, you know, that's kind of the short version of what we do, but it all has to do with the timing, and then really the angles and, you know, positioning of our glove when the ball hits it. So, you know, being late is not an option as far as that's concerned.
I think that makes a lot of sense. One of the things you kind of spoke about a little bit was, you know, the pre-pitch movement. And one of the things that I noticed with a lot of guys, it seems like it's really catching on. Guys are having much bigger pre-pitch movements now than they used to, you know, where, you know, we used to give a target and then you'd have a half moon or a relax. Now you see guys kind of going down and tapping the dirt, or there's a lot different pre-pitch movements now. And you're saying some of the bigger pre-pitch movements don't necessarily, you know, fit in with your organization. How much of that is due just to pitcher preference? You know, maybe you guys have found the pitchers like looking at a somewhat static target versus, you know, just other factors that might come into play.
I think it's pitcher dependent. Some of it's pitcher dependent. Some of it is you're going to get blamed if the pitcher misses his spot anyways, and most likely pitchers miss their spots. So there, you know, there's kind of both sides of the argument right there. But what we're trying to do is just give ourselves the best chance to be in the desired location. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's more about like taking the quadrants that we're trying to get to and then making sure that we can dominate that one rather than the hope of being able to cover a whole bunch of it. We're still, obviously, if it's a misfire or crossbody or something, we're still working to be as ready as possible so we can get there. But we are hedging some bets to certain locations as far as that's concerned, like, you know, selling out slightly to certain places rather than just thinking if this guy throws it over the plate, I'm just going to rip through it and, you know, let it play. So, again, I think it's going to be per team, organization, you know, their philosophy of what they want. You certainly can make the argument that you're always, you know, most likely going to be able to help the pitchers rather than hurt them. So you show, which I'm sure everybody who's had to deal with this has taken statistics to the pitching coach of the pitchers and say, listen, if I do it this way, you're going to get this. If I do it this way, you're going to get more. And generally they're going to lean towards, yeah, I'll take more. Mm-hmm. But there are very, you know, specific or guys that want very specific things. And again, we're there to serve them. So if you lose just a little bit because that guy's going to be a little bit more effective, I think you absolutely should go that direction. You know, I just think it's all based on whatever org you're in or team you're with, that you're going to have what you do, and that's going to be your philosophy.
Yeah, I think that's, as I'm thinking about what you said, I mean, you got guys that are throwing 100-mile-an-hour two-seamers, or 100-mile-an-hour sinkers, basically. And the movements that you have to make to be able to just catch it, I'm not talking about manipulate it and rip it through the zone, just catch it. That's a much different skill than being at a high school level when you got a dude throwing 79 to 81, with no movement and some arc on it. I mean, I know for me personally, last summer when I was with USA Baseball, some of the arms I caught, because I was in the bullpen catching and helping out, and we got dudes that are, we had a lot of dudes that were drafted in the first round this year, and some of those guys are up to 100. And I'll be honest, me at almost 40 years old, it was like defensive mode. I wasn't trying to manipulate it I was just trying to catch it. So as you got guys at the big league level that throw very hard with a lot of movement, and yeah, they're going to be more accurate than guys in high school, but still, we have to be able to, to adjust on the fly. I just think it's kind of a different skill set, and I think that makes a lot of sense. Where we're kind of aiming for a smaller target, I guess. You just can't start your mitt on the ground every time and think that you're going to, have some perfect, pre-pitch movement where you tap the ground and bring the ball up and you're getting balls that are 6 inches at the bottom of the zone. I guess more power to you if you can, but maybe that's just a hard approach to take overall.
I think it has to do with your angles, right? So for us, where you and I were taught to be here, we're going to have them in a totally different position. So you can create still really great angles and get balls out of the zone. But what we're trying to do is to get like the 55% or the 45% balls called strikes, not necessarily just trying to get the 12% strike called a strike. We want to make sure that if it should be called a strike in any way, like we're going to get it. And that's the expectation. If we're able to get more, of course, right? Why wouldn't you? But I don't want them to get to the point where it's like, I'm trying to get the 10% strike and then screwing up the 50% strike. Mm-hmm. I don't want that to be the focus. The focus is, like you said, we're just going to catch it and then be in great positions. And then, now we can get into like, what is the umpire seeing? And we want the umpire to see the ball where it's presented. That's the goal. We don't want him to see you catch it, move it, manipulate it or whatever, and then present it. So we would call that like a 2-piece or a 3-piece move. We want it to be a 1-piece move. It gets thrown and then he sees where it is. And if we can use the force of the ball and the angles that we create with our levers, that's the goal. Now, the nuance of it, if you watch Will or Barnesy, like especially Barnes, like to his arm side, it looks like he moves the ball a ton, and I can promise you he's only trying to like move it like a ball or half a ball. He just has momentum and the ball's doing what it wants to. And it's going further than probably, or what we see on television. He also approaches outside the ball and already has momentum coming to the zone. And then that happens so fast that we just see this move that looks really big. And I think if you went to all the guys, and if we watched the young men in travel ball, or if we watched the high school kids or the college kids, even the young kids, if we put a camera out at 400 feet wide angle, the game looks really easy, right? And it slows things down and you can see the moves a lot bigger. But if you switch it around and as you know, like you're 1 foot behind the catcher, that game is really fast. So what we're trying to do is just be in position so when that does happen, that ball just ends up where we want it to be, wherever that might be.
That's an excellent point. And just to clarify, so everybody that's listening maybe understands, because again, I know you have access to a lot of video and a lot of information, and I've gotten I've taken the Wizard of Oz look behind the curtain a couple of times and seen some of the systems that you guys use. So just so everybody listening completely understands, when you say a 55% strike or 45% strike or a 10% strike, each pitch that's thrown crosses over an X and Y coordinate, and it gets charted. This pitch is 45% likely to be called a strike. That pitch and that coordinate is going to be called a strike, 35% of the time. And obviously, the further away from the zone you get, the less likely it is to be called a strike. And I am 100% with you. I see a lot of guys, whether it be online or that I talk to in camps or wherever it may be, that they're trying to get the 10% strike. They're trying to steal the ball that's one ball off the dirt or four balls off the side of the plate, rather than just the borderline one, so to speak, the one that you actually can get sometimes. And I think that's a big differentiator. And I think that's something important to realize, that you don't have to steal the 10% strike. You just need the ones that are, below wherever you guys come up with, whatever the number is, say 50, 45, whatever. But you don't have to steal everything. Just because we can measure this stuff now doesn't mean you have to turn into David Copperfield or David Blaine and like turn everything into a strike. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because that makes a lot of sense, and it rings true with me. And I see a lot of guys that I'd go so far as to say, kind of do it incorrectly or maybe get too aggressive with it.
I think everybody just has their own learning curve with it. At some point, you're going to hit a sticking point. Like you will hit that point where it's like, okay, I've got to back this off. And we've done that. We've gone too far with stuff. And then it messes guys up because they get so enamored, especially with the numbers, right? They get so enamored with getting a 12% strike, the pitch that has 12% strike probability, that they lose a lot of the 50-50s. And that's not necessarily the goal, right? Obviously, if you can get a pitch called a strike, get it. I'm 100% there. Like every strike is worth much more than a ball. And like I said, you don't know what pitch of the game is going to be the important pitch. And it might be the second pitch of the third inning, right? And all of a sudden you just mentally missed it. Boom, ball, changes the whole course of the game. Now, I do think that we just have to, at some point, get past the tipping point and say, like, okay, here's kind of what the new fundamental is. And I don't know if we're there yet, right? I don't know. And like you mentioned earlier, with the guys with the glove drop and the rip and the push, and more power to everybody until it gets to where it doesn't work. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I'm not saying that what we do is the best way. It's just the way that we do it, right? We found some success with it. We like how it works. I'm not here to judge anybody. Like I've learned from a lot of different people, and quite honestly, we practice a lot of different techniques because I don't want these guys to say this is the only way I catch, and now in a ball game they're getting balled all over the place. Like you might have to go back to what you and I were taught, to just stick it, be strong, stop it right where it is. And we encourage the guys. Like there's days where we have stick it days, or we have like alternate setup days. We ask the guys to have a lot of different setups, and then there's days where it's like, okay, get out of your comfort zone, try something. This dude isn't going to call a strike, get completely crooked in different ways, practice it, because we don't want the first time you have to put that into play in the playoffs. We don't want that to happen.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And one of the things that I'm thinking about as you're speaking about that is, it seems like we're kind of in a weird or interesting time to be a catcher or a catching coach, just in the evolution of catching. Again, if we thought when you and I grew up, even probably as recently as, say 5 years ago, I would say most people taught, hey, we're not trying to fool the umpire, catch strikes, throw balls back. And now we see guys that are like completely aggressive, that are ripping balls, from right off the dirt basically. And catchers are making very, very aggressive moves. And I just have to think that I've always given big league umpires a lot of credit. I think those guys are fantastic. As easy as it is to critique those guys the next day on Twitter or on SportsCenter, for the most part, those guys do a phenomenal job. They get the majority right by far. But now it seems like and again, I don't have any stats, but it seems like these guys are getting fooled more often than they used to. It seems like catchers are stealing more strikes. And I think because of that, we've seen the big movements and we've seen the aggressive movements or whatever you want to call it. And so, like I said, to me, it's just an interesting time because I do think that I don't know if it's going to be umpires improving. I have to imagine when umpires go back and watch video and they see a guy, stealing a strike that's a 12% pitch, they have to get blasted, by their supervisor, just like a coach may blast a catcher for having a bad game or whatever it is. So I'm just kind of interested to see how that changes. And that does kind of lead us into something you hit off, in the very beginning of the show. You talked about the electronic strike zone some. I'd be curious to get your thoughts. I've spoken about it a couple of times, and I would say I'll let you go first. But I'm open-minded towards it. I know a lot of people are not fond of it and don't like the idea of it, but I'm trying to remain open-minded. But I'd love to hear what if you had to make a prediction or what you think about it.
I don't know. At this point, I'm just going to roll with the punches and see what they tell us, right? Like, to me, to speculate what it might be, I've seen it in action. I don't like it necessarily, but if it's there, it's there. And what are we going to do about it? I think it changes how we go about our day slightly because the timing aspect isn't necessarily the big piece anymore. So probably would be a little less receiving, a little bit more throwing, a lot more game planning and targeting. I think that just changes. That'll just be what changes within our day. The relationships piece is still going to be, first and foremost. It has a way to go, and I think they've admitted as much. The umpires, I don't know how they necessarily feel about it. It's not exactly a question I would go and ask them when I'm, talking to them after the game or whatever. But I think if it happens, it happens. We'll deal with it then. I do think it helps with targeting. The running game will be zero. I just don't see how you can. These guys, the showcase numbers that everybody gets all in a tizzy about are real. Because when we do the showcase, man, it's in the 1/6s for 3/4 of the dudes, and like low 1/6s because they can cheat and get into positions. If you're going to get a fastball and you don't really have to worry about catching it for a strike, all you have to do is try to catch it and throw it. Mm-hmm. There's going to be guys thrown out by a mile. Now they can do things with the lefty pickoff and, they can manipulate some of the rules, but I think that the running game will go from 5 to 0. I just don't see how that's really going to help it. So I think it would do more harm to the game than good, personally. But if it happens, then we just deal with it. I don't think there's a reason to be upset about it. It's the evolution of the game in any way that they decide, and I don't have that big of a voice, so we'll just roll with what they give us.
Well, I don't think anybody at the big league level really cares what I think about it either, but I'm kind of with you. It seems like the technology is moving in that direction. I agree with you. It's not there yet. I think everybody who's in charge of it kind of agrees that it's not there yet, but they also they see it getting better, and they want to make the game as accurate as possible. So I understand it. Again, I think there will probably be some hidden consequences. Like you said, I think the running game would change. Maybe you see more offensive guys back there. I don't know. Well, the other kind of, I guess, interesting topic that's around the receiving stuff. And again, we've only got a couple of minutes left because I'm going to restrict your time and get you off of here before too long. So we won't talk too long about it. But, the one knee stance and the setup and that sort of stuff, I would see that changing a lot too, where right now it's very popular and, possibly for good reason that a lot of guys are wanting to switch to a one knee stance and try to maximize the bottom of the zone. But I think that would kind of go away, if we had an electronic strike zone too.
I don't know. I'm not sure. The benefits to being on a knee as far as the wear and tear of your body, if we just looked at that piece alone, it might be, I think it's worth it, right? I don't have shoot. been doing one knee stances since I was a high school coach. So not really like, not to the extent that maybe it is now, but you know, I had like an injury, not me. One of my players, the only catcher I had a freak injury, got hit with a helmet on the play of the play out the whole year. I had to ask for volunteers. So I wasn't killed. And I'm like, there's nobody on base, just go to a knee. Who cares? Like, we gotta get through these games. You know, you've never done this before. So, you know, just an easier way to go about it. So I look at it as it's just easier on your body. I love all the hybrid stances. I mean, we ask our guys to have a primary stance, a one knee stance, and then as many hybrid stances as you can, you know, 8 to 10 different stances, because, you know, a stance for every situation, a stance for every different pitcher. You know, that one pitch that you have trouble with, like, find a stance that you're going to work with it. If you can, you know, not be obviously too predictable, that if you just change and you know what pitch is coming. But yeah, I agree. It'll be incredibly offensive. The days of the catch first backup, especially, like, I might not be a thing anymore, which stinks because it's like the craft of our position and everything. But we'll see. You know, I don't know. I think it's interesting to see how it's going to play out.
Well, that's an interesting conversation, because I mean, you have to think if you could get on one knee and save yourself, so to speak, if we'll just call it that, you know, be a little more easier on your body. You know, now you got guys that are catching 130 games. I mean, could they catch 150? I don't know.
Right.
I mean, that's something that I guess time will tell, but that's definitely an interesting topic that that you're right. Maybe that's something we need to look into. So I want to ask you one more question on that topic, and basically just because somebody asked me earlier today, and I'd love to get your thoughts. You know, we see the one knee stances and the setups at the big league level. We've seen it filter down into the youth level, and I know the guys you work with are professional athletes, but just in your opinion, do you think there's a place for that in the amateur game, whether it be high school or even younger than that right now, or do you like to see guys start that at an older age?
No, I wouldn't teach, like I said at the very beginning, I wouldn't teach anything different from 9 years old until, you know, a guy's 40. There's going to be different challenges and, you know, strengths and weaknesses within each, but I think it's a part of it. I don't know. I just don't know if it's the answer. I don't know. I do think that and I know some guys catch better in a secondary stance, right? They catch better. Some guys catch better in a primary. Some guys catch better on a knee. We've got to be able to do all of them. I don't think there's a one size fits one at all in any of this. I think we just need to be flexible with not only our thinking, but then our mindset with what we're doing. If it's, okay, I'm going to do this, and then you see that it doesn't work, you've got to do something different. Now, the kind of the mainstream thought of, well, he's on a knee, he can't do this, he can't throw, he can't block. Maybe he wasn't going to catch, or I'm sorry, maybe not. He wasn't going to throw that dude out if he was in, you know, a showcase setup, and maybe he wasn't going to block that ball if he was in the mindset of, there's a runner on third, the winning run's on third, I'm going to try to block it. Like, you don't know. I think what we have to do is just find out what the dude can do, right? Because if he can do certain things, and if he can do them pretty darn well from any place, then that's what that specific guy should be doing, or woman. I think what we do need to find is that, you know, it's going to take some time for everybody to get used to it. And I think the chatter will in time kind of die down, because there will be times where it's like he missed the ball, or, you know, he couldn't reach it. Well, that's a problem. If he couldn't reach it, it was a normal pitch. But if it was a pitch that he could normally get to, and then he just didn't block it, well, who's to say that he wasn't going to get there, or he was going to get there? So I think we just have to be careful, now, you know, as a group of coaches or evaluators, and saying, like, this is good or this is bad, because I don't think one is necessarily better than the other. I think they both have a place. You know, the traditional secondary stance, which we don't talk about secondary at all around here. We talk about hybrids, right? I want them to be able to do it all, not necessarily just sell out to the throw or just sell out to the block. I want them to find the place they can maximize throwing, blocking, and receiving, or blocking and receiving on this pitch, or throwing and receiving on this pitch, or blocking, you know, total. And that's the stance that you, rather than saying it's my primary and this is my secondary, like we were all taught, you know, as young kids, and that's all we were taught. You were taught two ways.
Yep.
And now I think it's just, there's 1,000 ways, and I think all 1,000 of them are great if you pick and choose which ones are great for you.
Right.
I know that's a really raw answer, but like that's what I truly believe.
Well, I mean, I'm with you. It's a hard question to answer because it, you know, my thing right now is I hate when people say it depends. Like, I know it depends, but it is one of those answers where it depends. I mean, it really does. There's a lot of variables, and it's kind of hard to even nail down and give a concrete answer because it depends on so many things. It can depend on, like you said, what's more important right now, who's on the mound, the how late is it in the game. I'm with you. And to me, that's one of the biggest changes I think I've noticed over the past couple of years, you know, where, like you said, there used to be a primary stance and secondary stance, and that was it. And now there's, you know, there's not a primary and a hybrid. There's a primary and about 30 hybrids, you know, depending on what you need in each particular situation. So
that's a question for you is like, all right, it does depend, right? But say a guy is a horrible blocker and he becomes 5% better, right? From a knee setup or a hybrid setup. Well, that's a better place for him to be. Not necessarily the best place for him to be because, you know, whatever, but for that point in time, that day in time, that might be the best position he could possibly get into. Then then it is you know, he might miss 8 out of 10, but he was going to miss 9 out of 10. So,
no, I'm with you. Yeah, I'm with you. And that's what I think good coaches do. You know, for me, one of the best coaches I feel like I've been around when I was at Louisville, our pitching coach, who's now the associate head coach, Roger Williams, when people at Louisville, they've had really good pitching staffs since he's been there. I mean, for the past 13 years. And people will come up to me and ask, you know, say, what makes Roger so special? Like, what does he do so special? Why is he always so good? And to me, the answer was he always put guys in the game in the right situation. We never had the wrong dude on the mound. I mean, it's a testament to him. He was phenomenal about having the right guy in the mound, pitching in the right situation. And I'm a huge believer. That's one of the reasons why he's so good. Super knowledgeable and works hard and recognizes talent and all that sort of stuff. But if I had to pick out one thing, he puts dudes in position to have success. I mean, that's as simple as it gets. And I feel like our job is kind of the same as coaches as we're talking about stances. Just like you said, if a guy's 5% better in this stance, our job as a coach is to help him figure that out and help him get in that position, you know, a little more often and in the right times. You know, again, just because that's the right stance at this pitch, it might not have been the correct stance for this pitch. So it's kind of a gray area and it does depend, but I like having the context with that answer because I think that makes a lot of sense.
And I think there's there's the two pieces. There's the openness that you must have, right, to winning and losing each pitch because the guys are learning. The same way that a shortstop might take this route versus this route. I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing that out there, right? But then it's also the second piece is our ego. And like you're saying, like if you're putting people in the right positions, then the success or failure of it is the game. So we can't necessarily take that personally. If I think this is the right place for you to be in this situation, or you think that's the right place because we have a relationship and there's trust there, then that's the right thing to do. It doesn't always work out. You're hoping that it works out more often than it doesn't. But in this game where things don't work out quite a bit, how can you say, how can one say this is the way to do it and this is the wrong way to do it? And I think that's the challenge. And this goes way back to like when I worked with Tom House, is like he challenged everything we did and what everyone else did, and people didn't like it. And now that if you look back at stuff we're doing in like 03, 04, 05, it's like a mainstream thing now where he was being crucified in other ways, but it was more just challenging the norm or challenging the conventional wisdom to say this is right or wrong. And I think maybe that's one of the best things that I learned from Tommy, is that, like, you know, question everything. There's no right or wrong, and there's no absolute. And you know, you gotta, if you're prepared, and you know, those caveats of trust and communication and flexibility, like all those different things, how can you be wrong? You know, you might make a wrong decision, but I don't think you're necessarily wrong.
Yeah. I think you're right. You know, I like that. I'm a big fan of that. You know, question everything. You know, constantly question everything. I think that's the only way you get better. I think when you get complacent and when you know, you get stuck in your same thought process, or you know, your same you know, series of decisions that you make. I think that's when things become stagnant. You know, so that's a great approach to take. You know, with him, and obviously you've carried that into what you do now, and that's one of the reasons that he's done well and you've done well. So a lot to be said for that. But Ryan, man, like I said, I know your son has baseball practice here shortly. We got a time limit where we got to cut this thing off. But as always, man, I enjoyed talking to you, and thanks for coming on. Dropped a ton of great information. I'll put all your information on the screen where guys can find you on Twitter and your website, and link to that. So if one of the younger guys wants to come to your camps whenever you have them, we'll at least give them the info. But man, thanks again. Always enjoy it, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks, Sam. This has been great, man. Anytime. I'd love to talk to you.
You got it, man. Enjoy it. Thanks, Ryan.
All right.
See you.